There's a woman you may have passed by, one who seems to live just slightly beyond the rhythm of the world. She doesn't seek attention. She doesn't chase anyone. She isn't trying to be saved. She simply is intact, quiet, and strong in a way that confuses people. Alone, but never adrift. People assume they know what solitude means. They think it's the absence of love, of success, of fulfillment. But they rarely consider that. For some, solitude is not a gap to be filled. It's a sanctuary that reveals the soul. When a woman walks alone, it's not because she couldn't find a companion. It's because she stopped searching for one to complete her. She began searching inward. This kind of woman doesn't announce herself with grand gestures or loud declarations. She isn't scrolling through dating apps late at night, hoping for someone to validate her existence. She's not lonely. She's discerning. She's not bitter. She's sovereign. She's not waiting. She's already arrived. What unsettles people most about her isn't her independence. It's the peace she exudes. A peace not granted by approval, but carved out by facing the echoes of her own mind. It's not serenity born from ease. It's hard-won, earned in silence, sculpted from heartbreak, and polished by reflection. They don't understand her because they've never dared to know themselves so deeply. She's lived the scripts they wrote for her, once eager, hopeful, stretching herself thinner with every compromise, contorting into roles to be wanted, accepted, loved. But she knows now, some roles were never written by her soul's hand. And once you see the strings, you can't pretend to dance without feeling like a puppet. So she stopped. She stopped performing. She stopped bleeding for the comfort of others. She withdrew not to punish, but to awaken. She began the terrifying, glorious work of self-remembrance, not the Instagram kind of healing with soft affirmations and curated sunsets, but the raw, disorienting collapse that precedes true awakening. The nights spent crying over things she couldn't name, the days she couldn't get out of bed because everything felt false. The relationships she let go of, not because she stopped loving, but because she finally started listening to the truth beneath the longing. It wasn't about giving up. It was about refusing to keep losing herself, so she built something new, slowly, quietly, within. At first, it felt like exile. People called her difficult, picky, cold. They said she was too much or not enough, but she knew what they were really saying. You're no longer easy to control. She didn't collapse. She crystallized. What began as solitude became sacred. In that space, she met the parts of herself she once abandoned to be liked. The voice she once silenced to maintain peace. The dreams she buried under the rubble of other people's expectations. One by one, they returned to her, not with rage, but with longing. And she welcomed them back like lost children finally coming home. This isn't a story of rebellion. It's a story of return. Carl Jung said that the greatest journey a human can take is not across the seas or through the skies, but into the depths of their own soul. And that's exactly what she did. When others were busy building images, she dismantled illusions. When they sought comfort in noise, she found truth in silence. When they feared being alone, she discovered the companionship of her own spirit. Not everyone is ready for that. Not everyone wants to look in the mirror and see who they've become. It's easier to fill your life with distractions and call it love. It's easier to beg for connection than to confront your abandonment wounds. It's easier to stay in cycles than to break them, because breaking them means you have to start over. Alone. But she chose the harder path. She broke the cycle, and in the ashes, she built something untouchable. She no longer measures her worth by attention, affection, or how many messages sit unanswered in her inbox. Her currency is peace. Her wealth is freedom. Her power is presence. So when she walks into a room, people feel it, even if they don't understand it. She doesn't have to speak. Her silence speaks for her. It's the kind of silence that unsettles the performative, that draws admiration from the awakened and resistance from the asleep. She isn't playing games. She isn't testing anyone. She's living in truth. And truth has its own magnetic field. She doesn't entertain shallow conversation. Not out of arrogance, but because her time is sacred. She's learned that the most expensive thing you can offer someone is your energy, and she won't spend hers where it isn't met with reverence. She doesn't crave validation. She craves resonance. And that is why she seems elusive, because few know how to meet someone at the soul. Most still flirt at the surface, afraid of what might be uncovered in depth. She has no interest in shrinking to be palatable, no desire to mold herself into someone else's fantasy. She's not waiting to be chosen. She's already chosen herself. And that choice changed everything. It taught her that love is not an escape. It's not a solution. It's not a transaction. Real love is expansion. Real love requires two whole people, not two wounded ones trying to fill each other's cracks. So if she waits, she does so without bitterness. If she walks alone, it's not because she's unworthy. It's because she refuses to accept less than truth. And truth is rare. She understands now that the love she's willing to wait for must not ask her to dim. It must not require self-abandonment. It must not demand silence when her truth rises. It must not mistake her softness for submission or her standards for superiority. The love she seeks must rise to meet her, not in perfection, but in presence. Because she's not afraid of flaws. She's not afraid of darkness. She's already danced with her demons. She simply wants someone brave enough to bring their own into the light, someone who has met their shadow and can still hold love without shaking. Until then, she chooses to remain whole, not out of defiance, but out of devotion. Devotion to herself, to her healing, to her truth, to the ancestral voices that whisper, "You were not born to beg." And that devotion scares the world, because a woman who no longer needs anything from you is a woman you can no longer control. She can't be bribed with compliments or manipulated with silence. She doesn't fall for charm. She listens for truth. And when truth doesn't come, she walks away, quietly, completely, and without looking back. She doesn't burn bridges. She lets them collapse if they were never built on solid ground. This is not a trend. It's not empowerment sold in pink packaging. It's revolution, internal, invisible, unstoppable. And it begins the moment a woman decides that her soul is more important than any storyline she was forced to believe. She used to make herself small, not just in rooms, but in relationships, in language, in the way she existed. She swallowed her intuition to keep others comfortable. She softened her edges so she wouldn't be called harsh. She smiled even when her soul was screaming. That woman, she's gone now, and the one who took her place didn't just arrive overnight. She was born from ashes, from silence, from countless moments where she was made to feel like her truth was too much. Every time someone asked her to tone it down, shrink a little, be easier, she remembered. She carried those moments like tiny stones in her chest until the weight became unbearable. And then one day, she dropped it all. What people don't understand is that awakening often looks like withdrawal, not because you're hiding, but because you're finally hearing yourself. She stopped going to places that didn't feed her spirit. She stopped entertaining conversations that drained her energy. She stopped chasing anyone who walked away. And instead of collapsing without them, she soared. She reclaimed her own company as sacred. She learned to eat dinner alone without the ache, to walk through crowds without searching for familiar eyes, to lie in bed without needing someone to say goodnight just to feel real. In that stillness, she began to remember what was always hers. There's a strength that doesn't raise its voice, a fire that doesn't burn with rage but with purpose. She found that fire. It was buried under years of emotional labor, under centuries of women being told to wait, to serve, to smile, but it was there, waiting. And when it rose, it didn't explode, it illuminated. That's what unnerves people. Not her independence, but her illumination, because she doesn't ask for permission to exist anymore. She doesn't apologize for needing more. And when someone tries to gaslight her into thinking she's being unreasonable, she doesn't argue. She simply leaves. You can't manipulate a woman who has found clarity. And make no mistake, she's not immune to love. She still longs, aches, dreams. She still notices beauty in the way someone's eyes soften when they talk about what they love. She still hopes for a touch that feels like home. But her longing no longer turns into self-abandonment. She doesn't chase anyone to prove her worth. That was a lesson burned into her bones. She's not bitter. She's boundaried. She's not arrogant. She's aware. She knows now that you can want connection without compromising your soul. And if someone makes you choose between yourself and their affection, it isn't love, it's control. Once upon a time, she would have chosen them anyway. She would have believed that maybe if she just tried harder, gave more, stayed silent, they'd come around. But now she honors the part of herself that says no. She honors her intuition like a compass that never lies. even when it points away from what her heart temporarily wants, because she's done mistaking hunger for love, done calling trauma chemistry, done worshiping the bare minimum because it felt safer than being alone. She has stopped auditioning for roles that diminish her. No more shape-shifting to be palatable. No more softening what is sacred. And the world tries to diagnose this clarity. They call her intimidating, difficult, high maintenance. But all those labels reveal is the fear people carry around women who don't need their approval. The kind of fear that arises when control no longer works. Because when she finally stopped explaining herself, defending her standards, making excuses for why she's still alone, something clicked. She's not waiting to be chosen. She's choosing. She's choosing her peace over performative love. She's choosing depth over distraction. She's choosing herself every time someone asks her to betray her truth for connection. And that right there is revolutionary. She is not a tragedy because she's alone. She is a triumph because she found gold in her solitude and refused to settle for silver masquerading as intimacy. People don't know what to do with a woman who refuses to be consumed. They know how to possess, how to praise, how to control. But how do you engage with someone who is already whole? You don't fill her. You flow beside her. You don't fix her. You feel her. You don't impress her. You show up real. And that's rare. That's why she waits. Her solitude is not a holding cell. It's an altar. She doesn't fill it with noise or bodies or fake laughter. She fills it with art, music, stillness, truth. It is her home, not her punishment. And though she may still feel lonely sometimes, it is never the loneliness of lacking something. It is the sacred ache of expansion, of knowing that when the right connection comes, it will not fracture her center. It will meet her at it. Until then, she will keep shedding what isn't hers, the expectations, the performance, the fear. She will keep returning to herself again and again like a tide that refuses to abandon the shore. And every time she does, she becomes even more untouchable, not in the sense of being distant, but in the sense that no one can move her who hasn't earned the right to be near her soul. This is not a season of her life. It is the new foundation. She has stopped answering the door to things that knock with urgency but arrive with emptiness. She has learned the sound of peace. It's quieter than you think, but once you hear it, chaos can never tempt you again. She no longer waits to be understood. That was a younger version of her, the one who sat in rooms full of people and still felt invisible, who tried to translate her soul into a language others would accept. She once thought if she just found the right words, the right softness, the right silence, they would see her. But all they ever saw was what they wanted to see, not her. So she stopped trying to be seen in pieces. She chose to become whole. And in doing so, she began to witness the world in its raw form. Not just the outer world, but the ancestral one, the silent terrain of inherited beliefs and whispered warnings passed down through generations of women told to be small, to be pretty, to be chosen, to never be alone. She felt it all in her blood. The echoes of those who bent themselves into impossible shapes to be loved, the shadows of women who vanished inside marriages, expectations, and quiet despair. But she was born in a different time. Or maybe she simply remembered something older than time, something primal and wild that pulsed beneath the roles and the rules. She didn't just want love. She wanted truth. And when she realized how often love had been weaponized against women to keep them compliant, patient, pleasing, she turned inward. Not because she hated men, not because she gave up on love, but because she needed to see what remained when she stopped begging to be enough. And what remained was luminous. There's something terrifying about a woman who shines from within, because you can't sell her illusions. You can't bait her with praise. You can't lure her back to the box with promises of someday. She's already arrived, and her arrival wasn't public, it was sacred. It happened in the quiet, away from the gaze of others, in the aching solitude that most try to escape. That's where she remembered who she was before the world told her who to be, before the heartbreaks, before the compromises, before she learned to contort herself to avoid abandonment. She met that version of herself again, not as a stranger, but as a survivor. And she wept, not out of sadness, but out of recognition. She remembered her own fire, and now she tends to it like a priestess. She doesn't let anyone close who doesn't honor the heat. She no longer entertains people who arrive in her life just to see if they can dim her light. She's not here to be consumed. She's here to burn with clarity, with purpose, with unapologetic presence. This is the kind of woman you don't meet, you encounter. And that encounter can feel like a mirror or a wound, depending on how close you are to your own truth. Some see her and feel awe, others feel inadequacy. Few can stand still in her presence without shifting uncomfortably because she doesn't play the roles they've been taught to expect. She doesn't laugh on cue, she doesn't flatter, she doesn't fold, she listens. And in her listening, the silence becomes a reckoning because she sees through the performance. She always has. She just used to pretend she didn't for the sake of connection. Now, she names the dissonance. She walks away when truth doesn't rise to meet her. And she does it without apology, because her time is sacred now. Her body, her attention, her love, all sacred. There was a time she would have stayed just to prove she was worthy. Now she stays only where she feels rooted, not tolerated. And if that means she walks more paths alone, so be it. She no longer calls solitude a burden. She calls it a vow to never abandon herself again. She no longer reacts to the world's urgency. She no longer rushes to explain her choices to those who can't hear the language of healing. She doesn't justify the quiet. She doesn't defend her absence. She knows that not everyone will understand the terrain of her path. And that's okay. Some roads were never meant to be crowded, and still she feels. She still has nights where the ache returns, not for a person, but for a connection that can hold her whole truth. She still longs to be met, to be chosen not for her beauty, her body, her softness, but for her soul. She still hopes in the quiet spaces that one day someone will stand beside her, not to complete her, but to walk with her. But until then, she walks as herself, fully, gloriously, undeniably, because what she's cultivated inside her can't be shaken by loneliness. It was forged in the fires of loss, in the deep waters of shadow work, in the dismantling of everything she once thought made her lovable. She knows now what makes her lovable is not her usefulness, not her compliance, not her ability to nurture others at the expense of herself. It is her being. She is lovable because she breathes in alignment with her own essence, because she cries and still chooses to stay open, because she bleeds and still chooses to love, because she holds her truth in her mouth even when it trembles. This is the woman the world both reveres and resists, because she can't be bought, can't be controlled, can't be convinced that her value is determined by her ability to be someone's other half. She is not a half. She is the whole damn sky. And she's no longer folding herself into origami hearts just to be held. She holds herself now, with tenderness, with reverence, with grace. And that, above all, is the revolution. There's a kind of no that doesn't come from anger or resistance, but from clarity. A kind of no that rises from the bones, quiet and certain, like a gate closing softly behind you. It's the kind of no she learned to speak only after years of saying yes to everything that harmed her. Yes to being patient with people who refuse to grow. Yes to dimming her light to make others feel comfortable. Yes to staying when her spirit was begging her to leave. Yes, because she thought that's what love required. Yes, because she believed that self-sacrifice was noble. Yes, because she hadn't yet remembered the sound of her own soul. But something shifted. The more she chose herself, the more her no became holy. Not defensive, not sharp, but sacred. A boundary drawn not from bitterness, from deep reverence for her energy, for her peace, for her truth. Now, when something doesn't align, she doesn't debate, she doesn't plead, she doesn't justify. She simply says no and lets the silence explain. That's how she preserves herself. Preservation. That's the word people confuse with isolation. They see her choosing space and think she's building walls, but walls are meant to keep people out. What she's building are thresholds, doorways, entry points that require presence, integrity, and soul. She's not closing herself off, she's refusing to be entered without invitation. This distinction matters, because for most of her life, she didn't know she was allowed to say no. She thought being open meant being available to everyone. She thought being kind meant letting people walk through her, even when they brought chaos with them. But now she understands love without discernment isn't love. It's codependence. And so she chooses differently. Not with cruelty, but with care. The kind of care that doesn't just preserve her, it protects her future. It creates space for something more sacred to enter. And yes, people leave. Some people only loved her when she made herself easy to swallow, when she silenced her voice, when she bent to accommodate. Now that she stands, now that she speaks, now that she shines, those people disappear. But that's not a loss. It's a clearing. She no longer mourns what leaves when truth is spoken. She knows now that what cannot meet her there was never meant to stay. There's something magnetic about a woman who doesn't chase. Something powerful about the way she no longer explains herself. It's not that she doesn't feel. It's that she's done performing pain just to be validated, just to be validated. She doesn't beg. She doesn't audition. Her energy does the speaking now, and it speaks with precision. That's why fewer people are granted access, not because she's cold, but because warmth is sacred. And she refuses to set herself on fire to keep others comfortable. She knows now warmth should be mutual, not extracted. This is a different kind of woman, one who doesn't find worth in being chosen, but in choosing wisely. She doesn't need a partner to prove her wholeness. She is whole. That was the secret all along. The world told her she would be fulfilled when someone else called her theirs. But she discovered something much more powerful: the fulfillment of belonging fully to herself. And yes, it gets lonely sometimes. There are nights when the silence echoes too loud. Moments when the memory of a past touch creeps into her bones and begs for just a little comfort. And she feels it. She lets herself feel it all, without shame. But even in those soft moments of longing, she doesn't regress. She doesn't run back to what once hurt her. She doesn't reopen the door she locked for a reason. She simply wraps her arms around her own ribcage and breathes through the ache. Because she knows that the ache is not a signal to abandon herself. It's a sign that she is shedding the last remnants of a story that no longer serves her. She doesn't numb it. She doesn't avoid it. She walks through it like fire, and each time she comes out clearer, lighter, more aligned. Her loneliness is no longer a void. It is a womb. From it, something new is being born. Not dependence, but devotion. Not fear, but depth. Not longing, but discernment. She is not closed. She is focused. She is not hardened. She is healed. And while the world still rushes towards speed, performance, validation, she walks at the pace of truth. She knows that real connection doesn't arrive in a hurry. It takes time to build something that doesn't collapse under the weight of reality. So she waits, not idly, not passively, but actively, sacredly, choosing again and again to stay rooted in who she has become. And this act of waiting, not for someone, but for alignment, is her quiet revolution. She's not just walking for herself. Every step she takes in solitude echoes with the steps of the women who came before her, those who never had the chance, the ones who stayed when they wanted to run, who served when they longed to soar, who silenced their screams and buried their brilliance because they were told that a woman's worth is proven in sacrifice. She's breaking those chains, not with fury, but with presence, not with blame, but with becoming. And make no mistake, becoming is not a soft process. It's not a gentle ascent. It's a reckoning. It is learning to grieve for versions of yourself that played along with stories written by fear. It is learning to forgive yourself for every time you confused being needed with being loved. It is learning to reclaim joy without guilt. She has grieved, she has forgiven, she has reclaimed, and now her presence holds the weight of all that work. That's why it feels different to be around her. That's why she can no longer be manipulated by flattery or seduced by potential. She doesn't fall for beginnings anymore. She watches what someone builds. She listens not to words, but to patterns. Her ears are attuned to truth now, and truth rarely speaks in rehearsed lines. People used to call her emotional, dramatic, sensitive. Now they call her mysterious, guarded, wise. But she hasn't changed who she is. She's just stopped leaking her soul into places that never valued its richness. She has stopped gifting her softness to those who only wanted something to shape. And in doing so, she's become the kind of woman who no longer flinches when someone walks away. She knows departure is not always a loss. Sometimes it's a divine redirection. Sometimes it's the universe saying, you don't belong in that smallness anymore. So when things fall apart, she doesn't collapse. She listens. She pays attention to the lesson. And then she rebuilds, not from desperation, but from design. That's the difference now. Her life is designed, not defaulted. She chooses where her energy goes. She chooses what gets her attention. She no longer confuses urgency with importance. She knows the difference between chemistry and compatibility, between attraction and alignment. And because of that, fewer people have access to her. Not because she's withholding, but because she's honoring her growth, honoring the years she spent trying to make herself lovable by being everything to everyone. Now, she's everything to herself, and that has shifted everything. It has changed how she moves through the world. She doesn't explain her solitude anymore. She doesn't feel compelled to justify why she hasn't settled down. She sees now that she was never meant to settle, not in love, not in identity, not in purpose. She is not a woman who settles. She is a woman who expands. And that expansion doesn't always look like success to the outside world. It looks like slowing down when others are speeding up, saying no when the crowd chants yes, turning inward when the world screams for attention. But that's her compass now. Integrity, not performance. Because she's done with the dance. The one where women are told to smile more, bend more, want less. The one where they're praised for being convenient, punished for being whole. She doesn't dance to that rhythm anymore. She's creating her own music, and it sounds like silence, like truth, like freedom. People still try to decode her. They ask if she's waiting for the right one. They wonder if she's too picky. They speculate that something must have happened to her, as if trauma is the only explanation for a woman who chooses to be alone. But she doesn't waste energy correcting them, because the truth doesn't always need to be explained. It just needs to be lived, and she's living it. In the way she wakes up and feels peace in her own skin, in the way she sips her coffee in the morning sunlight without needing to perform, in the way she creates, writes, moves, breathes, without apology. She doesn't need someone else to witness her to know that she exists. She doesn't need her reflection in someone else's eyes to know that she is worthy. She knows. And knowing changes everything. This isn't about superiority. It's about sovereignty. It's about rising out of the rubble of who you were told to be and realizing that what you are underneath it all is already enough. She doesn't want to be someone's dream girl anymore. She wants to be her own reality. That's what makes her dangerous, not because she harms, but because she refuses to be harmed. She is no longer soft in the places where she used to bleed. She has learned how to be soft and still say no, how to be gentle and still walk away, how to love deeply without abandoning herself. This kind of woman doesn't need to conquer. She doesn't need to win. She simply needs to exist in truth. And that is what unsettles the system most of all. Because when a woman stops needing to be saved, she becomes her own liberation. There's a kind of stillness in her now that wasn't there before, not the stillness of giving up, not the numb silence of heartbreak, but the deep-rooted quiet that only arrives after you've made peace with yourself, after you've stopped waiting for someone else to give your life meaning. It didn't happen all at once. It was gradual, like dawn breaking across a lifetime of shadows. She didn't wake up one day and say, "I'm healed." No, healing came in fragments, in the pauses between disappointments, in the breath she took before saying no, in the moment she realized her own peace was worth more than any temporary connection. And now, this stillness is her compass. It doesn't mean she's done growing. It means she no longer grows through distortion. She no longer needs to be broken open by someone else's chaos to find herself. She no longer believes that love must arrive wrapped in struggle, sacrifice, or pain. That was the old myth, that suffering makes love more meaningful. She has outgrown that. She no longer romanticizes the kind of love that asks her to forget who she is. She's no longer intoxicated by potential. She wants reality, not the curated surface-level kind, but the raw, unedited truth of someone who has faced themselves and come back whole, because that's what she offers now, wholeness. Not perfection, not performance, but presence. And the thing is, she still wants love, deeply. But not just any love, not the kind that needs her to prove, to please, to earn. She wants a love that doesn't flinch in the face of truth, a love that sits in silence and knows it's still connection, a love that sees her fire and doesn't try to tame it. She is not afraid of intensity anymore. She's afraid of emptiness masquerading as companionship. So she waits, not with bitterness, but with discernment. She's not lonely. She's unwilling. unwilling to enter anything that would cost her the peace she bled to build, unwilling to mistake closeness for intimacy, unwilling to offer her soul in exchange for a moment of attention. She's not looking to be seen, she's looking to be met. And there's a vast difference. To be seen is to be observed, to be analyzed, desired perhaps, but to be met, that's sacred. That's someone arriving not just with interest, but with integrity. Someone who shows up with their own wholeness, not looking to be saved, not looking to save, but to share. She knows how rare that is. That's why she doesn't flinch when it takes time. That's why she's no longer tempted by the quick spark that fizzles into dust. She's not after a firework, she's after a slow-burning flame, the kind that can weather storms and still stay lit. She wants the kind of love that doesn't require her to shrink in order to fit. And until that love arrives, she keeps growing, not waiting, not pausing her life, not withholding joy. She laughs now fully. She dances in her kitchen. She paints, writes, runs her fingers through pages of books, and remembers how rich life is even without someone beside her. Because that was the lesson, that life doesn't begin when love arrives. Life begins when you stop abandoning yourself. And she has stopped settling, stopped explaining, stopped molding herself into the shape of someone else's expectations. Now she is the shape, the frame, the foundation, and anyone who wishes to be part of her world must know how to build beside her, not on top of her. There's no room left for control here, no space for shallow promises or masked intentions. She's not interested in guessing games. She's not impressed by charisma. She listens for consistency. She doesn't need magic. She needs meaning. And while the world still whispers that a woman alone is missing something, she smiles. Not with defiance, but with understanding. Because she knows now she is not missing anything. She is full, overflowing even. So much so that when someone finally arrives who's worthy, it won't be about completion. It will be about celebration. Love will not be a rescue. It will be a resonance. And until then, she is more than fine. She is radiant. Not because she always feels strong, but because she no longer fights herself. She no longer betrays her intuition. She no longer trades truth for affection. She walks with herself now, fully, without apology, without pause. And in her presence, the whole world shifts because something ancient has awakened in her. A knowing that cannot be undone, a sovereignty that can't be silenced. She is the woman who once waited, and now she simply lives. There's a kind of love she dreams of now, not the one she used to chase. Not the one written in childhood fairy tales where salvation came wearing someone else's name. This new love doesn't ask her to shrink. It doesn't arrive with rules hidden in kindness. It doesn't build on the expectation that she'll soften her edges just to stay. This love does not fear her fullness. It welcomes it. And if that love never comes, she's no longer afraid. Because the greatest thing she's learned is this: a woman who has come home to herself can never be lost again. Her joy is no longer dependent on being chosen. Her peace isn't held hostage by attention. Her wholeness cannot be undone by absence. There was a time when being alone felt like failure. Now it feels like devotion. She's not at war with desire. She still feels it. She still lets it move through her like wind across skin, but she doesn't let it make decisions for her anymore. She's learned to ask, is this love or is this longing in disguise? And that question has saved her many times, because now she can tell the difference between being wanted and being valued, between being seen and being honored, between being held and being consumed. She used to call it chemistry when her nervous system was on high alert. She used to call it attraction when it was actually an old wound resurfacing. But now she knows, love should never feel like survival. It should feel like breath, like expansion, like a mirror that reflects, not distorts. And until that kind of love arrives, or even if it never does, she walks in the kind of grace that comes only when you've reclaimed every broken part of yourself and woven it back into a stronger, softer whole. Her scars are not weaknesses. They are reminders of the battles she chose to stop fighting, of the love she used to beg for, and the self-worth she finally gave herself. Every mark on her soul is a symbol of her return, a return to truth, to integrity, to presence. This woman, now, she doesn't need to be convinced. She doesn't entertain projections. She doesn't explain the power she carries, because the world still wants to decode her, to name her, to tame her. But she has become untamed. Not wild in recklessness, wild in spirit, in sovereignty. In the way a tree grows freely once no one's trying to cut it back. She has grown like that, rooted, unshaken, grounded in storms. And yes, storms still come. She still has days when loneliness knocks on her ribs, nights when her hands reach across the bed and feel the ache of absence. But she doesn't run from those moments. She doesn't medicate them with distractions. She sits with them, listens, and then lets them pass like weather through a sacred landscape. Because she knows, even the ache belongs. She's not trying to avoid feeling. She's trying to feel without losing herself. And that, more than anything, is what makes her powerful. Not immunity to pain, but the refusal to abandon herself within it. The choice to stand inside the storm without begging for shelter in someone else's chaos. She shelters herself now, in quiet mornings, in art, in music, in conversations that nourish instead of extract. In the company of people who don't need her to be small so they can feel big, she is no longer willing to be anything but honest. And sometimes that honesty means walking away. Sometimes it means staying still when everything inside her wants to rush. Sometimes it means starting again. And every time it means choosing herself. That choice, it changes a woman. It doesn't make her invincible. It makes her undeniable. You feel it when she enters a room. Not because she demands attention, but because she doesn't. Her energy doesn't say, "Look at me." It says, "Listen to yourself." And that kind of presence is rare. She doesn't try to impress. She doesn't need to perform. She just is. Whole, untamed, rooted in a truth that doesn't bend for convenience. She lives in rhythm now, with herself, with her soul, with something deeper than desire. She has stopped rushing. She has stopped explaining. She has stopped offering herself to anything that doesn't honor her becoming. Because this is not a phase. This is not a reaction. This is the result of choosing presence over performance, clarity over chaos, truth over belonging. And this truth, her truth, is no longer negotiable. She is not lonely. She is luminous, not because of who stands beside her, but because of what stands within her. She walks now with a quiet knowing. If real love ever arrives, it will not come to complete her. It will come to meet her, fully, freely, fiercely. And until then, she doesn't wait. She lives. If this story resonated with something inside you, if it reminded you of your own power, your own silence, your own becoming, leave a comment below and let your voice be heard. Subscribe to this channel to stay connected to more stories that speak to the soul. And thank you truly for walking this path with me, for listening, for feeling, for remembering.